The SCHD ETF just announced their June 2023 dividend amount, and let's just say it has some investors concerned and not exactly thrilled. The 66-cent declared dividend amount for this most recent dividend payout is actually a 5 to 6% decrease from the exact payout that SCHD investors received around this time last year. Now in this video, we are going to do a deep dive into the SCHD ETF and figure out not only why the dividend decreased from the same quarter year over year, but also if SCHD investors should fear the future of this dividend growth ETF. Now we're going to go over all this and more right after you please drop a like in this video and subscribe for more future content like this. So before we go into the most recent SCHD dividend and talk about why it's been decreased and what this maybe means for the future, let's talk a little bit more about what the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF is and how the ETF works. So SCHD is a pretty simple ETF, yet it's been very effective as far as performance, historically speaking. The objective of the ETF is to track as closely as possible, before fees and expenses, the total return of the Dow Jones US 100 index. Now this is an index made up of around 100 or so stocks that all have a history of paying dividends, and most of the stocks within this index also have a history of raising their dividends. Now some of the highlights for SCHD. The fund is a low-cost, tax-efficient ETF, with SCHD's expense ratio being just 0.06%, one of the cheapest ETFs across the entire market, and in my opinion, definitely worth the price to have a high-quality ETF that tracks a basket of amazing holdings. Now, some more highlights about SCHD. There's around 651 million shares outstanding and about 47.2 billion in total net assets. Now, SCHD's current trailing 12-month dividend yield is around 3.8%. So this is one of the few ETFs across the entire stock market, which investors can buy into and receive a very nice starting dividend, but also be attached to a high-quality ETF with some massive capital appreciation as far as historically speaking. SCHD as far as share price is up 176% as far as all time, and that's just over around 10 or so years. Now, some of SCHD's top holdings are things like Broadcom, Cisco, United Parcel Service, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, Verizon, Merck, Texas Instruments, Pfizer, and abbvie. And although if you scroll through and look at all the holdings within the SCHD ETF, what's great about it is that most of these holdings are rather familiar, and you and I have probably heard of most of these stocks within this ETF, which is sometimes rare in the more large diversified ETFs, where in some cases you might not even know most of the holdings within the ETF. But looking here a little bit closer into the most recent distribution announced within just the last few days for SCHD shareholders, and comparing it to the previous June dividend, which was over 70 cents per share, with the most recent dividend only being around 66 cents per share compared to over 70 cents per share this time last year. A lot of SCHD investors were hoping for a 70-cent plus dividend to be announced during this June dividend, but unfortunately, this just didn't happen to be the case. Now, a lot of the SCHD investors are blaming this recent dividend drop on the most recent SCHD Reconstitution, which happened a few months back. Now, for those that might not know, a Reconstitution typically refers to the process of rebalancing or adjusting a portfolio or investment strategy to align with a predefined schedule or target or strategy. And this is commonly used in the context for exchange-traded funds or ETFs. Now, when an ETF or index fund is created, it aims to track the performance of a specific index or benchmark. However, over time, the weights of the individual securities within the index may change due to factors such as market fluctuations, corporate actions, or changes in the index methodology. Now, for SCHD specifically, the Reconstitution involves periodically reviewing the composition of the underlying index and making necessary adjustments to the ETF or index fund's holdings to bring them back in line with the target index. Now, during this process, the fund is going to be buying or selling securities to adjust their weights and ensure the fund's performance remains in line with the index that it tracks. So now looking back to SCHD's historical dividend payouts, it makes a lot of sense that the amount that's paid on a quarterly basis is going to change consistently because of the annual SCHD Reconstitution. Now, to be even more specific, SCHD Stan Craig said on Twitter that during the most recent Reconstitution, some of the biggest ads for SCHD were companies like abbvie, UPS, CBX, BX, and F. And during this Reconstitution, there were some big drop-offs from stocks like IBM, CMI, PRU, GPC, or HIG. Now, during these ETF reconstitutions, if a fund sells things that have a higher dividend yield, for example, and maybe buys things with a lower starting dividend yield. This could definitely affect the fund as far as future dividend payouts. Now, the last thing to keep in mind when it comes to SCHD's dividend payouts as far as this year and what investors should be looking for throughout the rest of this year is the fact that back in March of 2022, which was a year ago from last quarter, the SCHD dividend distribution was only 51 cents or so per share. Now, if you compare that dividend payout from last quarter where SCHD paid almost 60 cents per share to investors, that is a big jump, 51.7 cents all the way up to almost 60 cents per share. Year over year is a big increase in dividends distributed. So even though investors, as far as this most recent dividend payout for SCHD, did receive a small decrease of around 4 cents or so from Q2 of 2022, the overall total year-to-date distribution is still larger in 2023 than it was in 2022 to this point. So overall, what does this mean for the future of SCHD's dividend payouts and for the future of the fund collectively? I first think it's important to say that nowhere on the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF that the fund is going to continue to raise their dividend at the same rate that they did historically. And although if you look at the dividend growth that we've seen over the past 10 or so years or so, and the fact that it's been very, very impressive, it doesn't necessarily mean that just because this ETF raised their dividend as consistently and as often as they did historically, that it's going to continue to do so in the future. Now, I still personally do think that SCHD has one of the best strategies and might track the highest quality index for dividend growth investors across any other ETF in the market. But that being said, there are going to be times and quarters where the ETF might not raise their dividend as much as it did previously. But even with that being true, I still personally think that SCHD is going to continue to raise their dividend for a long, long time into the future. And even if the future dividend growth rate isn't as insane and as high as it's been in the past, I still think this ETF is a great investment vehicle for dividend growth investors to latch onto and to hold long term. And even though some of the SCHD investors are worried about the future dividend growth because of this most recent dividend payout, by giving SCHD's historical dividend payouts a very quick glance, I personally am willing to take the risk and hope that the future for SCHD and the dividend growth is still going to be intact, at least somewhat. But I want to hear what you guys think down below about the most recent SCHD dividend payouts. Are you personally concerned about the decrease compared to June of 2022, or are you still long SCHD and you believe in this fund long term? Comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to please drop a like in the video and subscribe for more content like this in the future. Thanks as always, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.